He did nothing wrong. 4 words. Spoken quietly into a microphone. Spoken with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who understands pain but refuses to add to it. Shohei Ohtani said those words. And when he did, something shifted in the room. Because everyone sitting in that press conference knew what had just happened. Everyone who watched the 8th inning collapse in real time knew exactly what those 4 words were protecting. Everyone who saw Mookie Betts walk across that field, head down, shoulders heavy, eyes avoiding the cameras, they all knew. This wasn't just another loss. This wasn't just a bad inning. This was the kind of night that tests a team's soul. The Dodgers didn't lose because the opposing team outplayed them from the first pitch. They didn't lose because of a controversial call or a fluke moment or bad luck written in the stars. They lost because the 8th inning happened. And in that inning, everything that could go wrong did. Jack Dreyer's pitches missed their spots. The defense broke down. Communication shattered. The lead evaporated. And by the time the dust settled, Mookie Betts was walking toward Ohtani with an apology on his lips, Jack Dreyer was being sent to the minors, Clayton Kershaw was issuing criticism that cut like a scalpel, and Muncy was absorbing a blow so painful it made the entire stadium wince. 1 inning. That's all it took. And the aftermath of that inning would echo far longer than the game itself. Before the 8th inning, this was a Dodgers game that felt manageable. Not easy. Not dominant. But manageable. The kind of game where you could see the pieces moving the way they were supposed to. Where the starting pitching did its job. Where the offense created just enough space. Where the bullpen was supposed to step in, lock the door, and finish what had been started. Ohtani had already delivered. He always does. He had stepped into the batter's box with that quiet intensity that makes opposing pitchers uncomfortable before they even release the ball. He had made contact. He had created pressure. He had done exactly what the Dodgers needed him to do. Mookie Betts was doing what Mookie Betts does. Playing the game with the kind of precision and intelligence that separates all-stars from legends. Reading pitches. Adjusting on the fly. Being the kind of player that anchors a lineup and makes everyone around him better. The scoreboard wasn't screaming victory, but it was leaning in the Dodgers' favor. And then the 8th inning began. And everything that felt stable became fragile in the span of a few pitches. Jack Dreyer walked to the mound carrying the trust of an entire organization on his shoulders. The bullpen door swung open. The crowd stirred. The game was being handed to him like a relay baton in the final stretch of a race. His job was clear. His role was defined. Hold the line. Protect the lead. Give the Dodgers what they needed to close this game out and move forward. He couldn't do it. The first pitch was a warning sign. Not catastrophic. Not immediately disastrous. But off. Just enough off that anyone watching closely could feel the tension start to build. The location wasn't crisp. The command wasn't there. And the opposing hitters, professionals who spend their lives waiting for moments exactly like this, they noticed. The second pitch made it worse. What should have been a strikeout became a walk. What should have been a quick out became a base runner. What should have been control became chaos. And then came the pitch that changed everything. Dreyer tried to go inside. He tried to reclaim the plate. He tried to assert himself the way a reliever in the 8th inning of a close game is supposed to assert himself. But the ball didn't go where it was supposed to go. It hung. And the opposing batter, eyes locked, hands ready, timing perfect, didn't miss it. The sound of the bat meeting the ball wasn't loud in a dramatic, cinematic way. It was loud in a sickening way. The kind of sound that makes a dugout go silent. The kind of sound that makes a pitcher's shoulders drop before the ball even lands. The ball shot into the gap. And the 8th inning, which was supposed to be a formality, became a nightmare. What happened next wasn't just about one pitch. It was about the moment when two players who should have been operating as a single unit, reading the same play, making the same decision, moving in the same direction, suddenly weren't. The ball was hit sharply into the outfield. The kind of hit that demands instant reactions. The kind of hit where hesitation costs runs and decisiveness saves games. Mookie read it one way. Dreyer signaled another. And in that split second, in that fractional moment where confusion replaced clarity, the play fell apart. The ball dropped. The runner advanced. The inning breathed. And the Dodgers' lead, which had felt secure just moments earlier, began to dissolve like salt in water. Mookie's glove hit the ground in frustration. Not at Dreyer. Not at the situation. At himself. Because Mookie Betts holds himself to a standard that doesn't allow for miscommunication. A standard that doesn't accept, almost. A standard that demands perfection in moments exactly like this one. But the damage was done. The opposing team smelled blood. The momentum shifted. The crowd, once muted and anxious, became loud and hungry. And the Dodgers, standing in that dugout watching their lead evaporate, could do nothing but watch the eighth inning spiral completely out of control. When the inning finally, mercifully ended, Mookie Betts did something that baseball doesn't always show you. He walked across the field. Not to the dugout. Not to the manager. He walked to Ohtani. And when he reached him, Mookie lowered his head. He didn't make excuses. He didn't explain the play or break down the miscommunication or talk about what he saw versus what Dreyer signaled. He didn't justify or rationalize or deflect. He simply apologized. To Ohtani. The cameras caught it. The broadcast lingered on it. And everyone watching understood exactly why that moment mattered. Because Ohtani had carried his part. He had done the work. He had delivered in his at-bats. He had given the Dodgers everything they needed from him. And now, through no fault of his own, through no mistake he made, that work was being threatened by a collapse in the eighth inning. Mookie knew that. He knew how much this season means to Ohtani. He knew how much every game carries weight when you're chasing something as big as what the Dodgers are chasing. He knew that Ohtani doesn't play this game casually. He plays it with everything he has. And so Mookie walked across that field and bowed his head and said sorry. Not because the media expected it. Not because the team culture demanded it. But because that's who Mookie Betts is. And the image of one of the best players in baseball, a World Series champion, a former MVP, a cornerstone of this franchise, lowering his head in apology was one of the most powerful, quietly devastating images of the entire season. The press conference came later. The lights were harsh. The microphones were waiting. The reporters had their questions loaded and ready. Everyone in that room wanted to know the same thing. What does Ohtani think about Mookie's mistake? What does he think about the eighth inning collapse? What does he think about the miscommunication that cost the Dodgers the game? Ohtani sat at the table. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't frustrated. It wasn't the face of someone searching for someone to blame or someone to throw under the bus. It was calm. Measured. But not empty. There was something deep behind those eyes. Something that understood exactly what had happened. Something that had already processed the pain of the loss and had already decided how to respond. The reporter asked the question directly. Shohei, how do you feel about Mookie's role in the eighth inning? Ohtani didn't hesitate long. He did nothing wrong. The room absorbed those 4 words slowly. Because they weren't just a diplomatic answer. They weren't just what a good teammate is supposed to say in front of cameras. They weren't performative kindness or media-trained deflection. They were a statement. A deliberate, intentional statement from the player who had the most right to be frustrated. From the player who had done his job and watched it unravel. From the player who had earned the right to point fingers and chose not to. Ohtani continued. His voice remained steady. His tone didn't waver. He talked about how baseball creates these moments. How miscommunication happens even between the best players. How the 8th inning didn't collapse because Mookie Betts failed as a player. It collapsed because baseball is unpredictable. Because Jack Dreyer couldn't execute. Because sometimes the game takes something from you even when you've done almost everything right. Ohtani wasn't performing generosity for the cameras. He was being honest. And somehow, that honesty, that refusal to assign blame to a teammate who had already blamed himself, made the moment even heavier. Because leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes leadership is 4 quiet words spoken into a microphone. He did nothing wrong. Those words set a tone. They established a standard. Not just for how this team wins, but for how this team responds when the game takes something from them. Clayton Kershaw doesn't speak carelessly. When Clayton Kershaw opens his mouth about the game of baseball, it comes from decades of experience. From playoff battles. From World Series heartbreak and World Series glory. From a career spent at the absolute highest level of this sport. So when Kershaw addressed what happened in the 8th inning, people listened. And what he said about Jack Dreyer was not kind. It wasn't cruel. Kershaw doesn't operate that way. But it wasn't soft either. It wasn't cushioned with the kind of diplomatic language that protects feelings at the expense of truth. Kershaw talked about location. About the pitches that needed to hit their spots and didn't. About the decisions that were made on the mound, or not made, that opened the door for everything that followed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform anger for the cameras. He spoke in the measured, matter-of-fact tone of someone who has seen too much baseball to be dramatic about it. But the weight of his words was unmistakable. At that level, in that inning, with that much on the line, you cannot miss there. You cannot give them that pitch. You cannot put your defense in that position. Short sentences. Direct criticism. No comfort offered. Kershaw wasn't being cruel. He was being honest in the way that only someone who truly loves this game, and truly respects what it demands, can be honest. Because softening the truth about Jack Dreyer's performance in that inning would have been an insult. An insult to the game. An insult to the team. An insult to Dreyer himself. The mistake was real. The consequence was real. And Kershaw refused to pretend otherwise. That criticism landed differently than anything the opposing team could have said. Because it came from inside. From someone who bleeds Dodger blue. From someone who wanted nothing more than to see that inning go differently. And that made it hurt more. The decision came quickly. By the time the final out was recorded. By the time the Dodgers walked off that field carrying the weight of what had just happened. By the time the locker room doors closed and the coaching staff gathered behind closed doors, the conversations had already begun. Jack Dreyer was being sent to the minors. In baseball, roster moves are made with logic and numbers and organizational strategy. Players are called up and sent down based on performance metrics and team needs and long-term development plans. But sometimes a roster move carries an emotional truth that no spreadsheet can capture. This was one of those times. Dreyer didn't lose the game alone. Baseball is never that simple. There were other moments. Other missed opportunities. Other plays that could have gone differently. But the 8th inning needed a response. The organization needed to send a message. Not out of cruelty, but out of accountability. Out of the understanding that at this level, in this market, with this roster, with these expectations, there is no room for an 8th inning like that one. Dreyer being sent down wasn't designed to humiliate him. It was a signal. A signal to every pitcher in that bullpen. A signal to every player on that roster. A signal that said clearly and without apology, this team has standards. This team has expectations. And when those expectations aren't met in the moments that matter most, there are consequences. Whether Dreyer returns is a story still being written. Whether he finds what he needs to find in the minors and comes back stronger and sharper and ready, that remains to be seen. But tonight, the signal was sent. And the message was received. And then there was Max Muncy. If the 8th inning was a team nightmare, Muncy's night was a personal one. Physical. Painful. The kind of moment that doesn't show up in the box score but stays with a player long after the lights go out. Muncy had been grinding all night. Working counts. Battling pitchers. Refusing to give away at-bats easily. The kind of performance that doesn't always make headlines but makes winning possible. And then the blow came. The pitch came inside. Too inside. The kind of inside that makes the entire stadium hold its breath. Muncy went down. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't echo. But it didn't need to. The reaction said everything. The way Muncy crumpled. The way the trainer sprinted onto the field. The way his teammates stood frozen at the dugout railing, watching and waiting and hoping. The training staff knelt beside him. They asked questions. They checked movement. They helped him to his feet slowly, carefully. And the question that immediately replaced every other question in the building was simple. Is he okay? For a Dodgers team already absorbing the weight of the 8th inning collapse. For a roster that had just watched Jack Dreyer's mistake unravel a game they were controlling. For a group of players standing in a dugout trying to process what had just happened, Muncy's painful blow added a layer of weight that felt almost unbearable. Baseball gives and takes. Sometimes in the same inning. Sometimes in the same at-bat. Sometimes all at once. Tonight, it took a lot from the Dodgers. The stadium emptied slowly. The press filed their stories. The cameras packed up. The lights dimmed one section at a time until the field was quiet and dark and still. And somewhere in that quiet, the Dodgers were already thinking about tomorrow. Because that's what championship teams do. That's what this roster was built to do. To absorb nights like this one and return the next day with the same focus, the same preparation, the same belief that the next game is a new opportunity. Ohtani had already shown them how. Not with a grand speech. Not with a dramatic locker room moment. But with 4 words spoken calmly into a microphone. He did nothing wrong. That was leadership. That was the tone being set. That was the standard being established, not just for how this team wins, but for how this team responds when the game takes something from them. Mookie Betts would go home carrying the weight of the 8th inning on his shoulders. He would replay the miscommunication in his mind. He would think about what he could have done differently. Jack Dreyer would pack his bag and make the drive that no professional athlete wants to make. He would face the humiliation of being sent down and the uncertainty of whether he'll get another chance. Muncy would wake up sore. He would test his body. He would answer questions about whether he can play tomorrow. Kershaw's words would sit in the minds of every pitcher in that bullpen. A reminder. A standard. A challenge. And Ohtani would arrive at the stadium tomorrow, calm, focused, ready, as if the nightmare of the 8th inning was already in the past. Because for Shohei Ohtani, the next game is always the most important one. And for the Dodgers, battered, humbled, and hurting after one brutal inning, tomorrow cannot come soon enough.